Debts that I owe, again, that's another situation. If you owe money, and if you die, who is responsible to pay that money? That's what I put in my will, for me personally, and I would encourage everyone to think that through. Obviously, they're going to take the funds from your estate, from from whatever your wealth is at that point. But you need to have someone who's going to be responsible for that, and you need to put that in there. Article 3 is guardianship. So your will is not just about inheritance, not just about burial, it's also about who's going to be the guardian of your children, if you have children. You can consider factors such as, if, let's say, you're caring for a sick mother, or you're caring for a father, or you're caring for, in some cases, caring for a pet. Who's going to be the guardian of that, or who's going to be the caretaker of those individuals is, again, a factor that should be considered. In my case, I have, again, a situation appointed in which if I were to pass, and my wife were to pass, I have a series of individuals, and I won't go through them, who should be the caretakers and the guardians of my children. And I think that everyone needs to think through this very carefully and talk with those individuals. So I've gone through this discussion with my relatives and my loved ones to say, if I pass and my wife passes, I want this individual to care for my child. If he passes and she passes, then I want this individual. And I go all the way through 3 scenarios. It actually ends up with my brother being the last person. But the point that I'm trying to make is that know that your will needs to account for the individuals that you're responsible for Islamically. As a male, and as a father, and as a husband, I'm responsible for my wife, financially. I'm also responsible for my 2 daughters. So now if I were to pass, I need to designate who's going to take on that responsibility Islamically. Article 4, debts and expenses. I direct that the executor applies first the assets of my estate to the payment of any legal debts, including such expenses incurred by my last illness and the burial, as well as expenses of administering my estate. I direct the executor to pay any obligations which are binding on me, such as unpaid zakat, charity, or payment of other means of redress for committing a sinful act, or unperformed hajj. This brings me to another subject, another piece of a will, is that when you die, you may have obligations on your shoulders that you did not fulfill. Like, for example, you did not perform hajj. Who is going to perform hajj for you? Another question that may be brought up, did you die in the middle of the year and there was zakat still due on your money for that year? And that's a Sharia issue that I won't get into. You want to ask probably a Islamic scholar on that one. But that's a consideration. Another factor that may be of consideration is any loans that you've taken. So it could be issues related to personal loans. It could be money that you have set aside to be used for a certain purpose. Like I put $500 in my account and it's going to be used at a later date to fund a Islamic growth project. Well, you need to designate that in your will, and someone needs to be responsible for that. So again, that's Article 4, debts and expenses. Very, very important. And at some point, I know the Sheikh will talk about this, but if you pass and you have debts that you still owe, and you haven't made any preparations for someone to pay them, then there can be some ramifications that you could foresee on the Day of Judgment. So we want to be protected so that we're not held accountable for something that we didn't prepare for, knowing that we all are going to die at some point. Article 5, which brings me to the fun part. This is the part that I am most passionate about, because this is the whole premise and purpose as to why I'm here today. Not too long ago, I was sitting at a table with a brother who's actually a relative of mine, and we were having a discussion about death, something I encourage everyone to have. And I said, if you were to die, are you prepared? And he said, sure, if I die, just make sure all my money goes to my wife. And at the time, I did not know if that was an accurate statement or not. And as I dug deeper into that statement and researched this topic, I found that's completely wrong, Islamically. You cannot designate all of your wealth to your wife, no matter how much you love your wife, or no matter how much, no matter what type of situation you are in financially, if she's completely needy. Islam, again, as a way of life, not as a religion, but as a way of life, has predetermined the exact amounts for each individual in your family and every living heir that you have, even it gets to your brother and your sister. In most situations, unless it's something extraordinary, your brothers and sisters are not actually going to inherit much at all. In my case, and I'll walk through this, it's going to be 0%. But the point that I'm trying to make is that brother's comment is what spurred my interest into this. And there are so many people, Muslims in particular, in which they have no plan for how their inheritance is going to be distributed when they pass. And there's a lot of Muslims who are under the assumption, the wrong assumption, might I add, that if they pass, their wealth needs to be distributed to their wife, who can handle it for everyone else. And that's wrong. That is wrong. Islam has preordained in fixed percentages who receives what, based on your exact situation. And those individuals need to receive those funds in that form or fashion. And if they're minors, then we can talk about that later, because it can go in a trust fund, or it can be designated to a guardian of those funds, like for instance your wife. But that's what I'm going to talk about now. And I think that if there's anything that is the most important, I think, in the will, I think number one, I would say the loans and the assets piece, because I certainly wouldn't want to be held accountable for money that I owe after I pass because I was unprepared. And secondly, out of all the money that I do have, I want to ensure that it's distributed Islamically correct, because I don't want to be held accountable for that. And I encourage everyone to take the means necessary to determine their inheritance based on the resources I'm going to share with you right now. So I'm going to jump to a resource that is online. It is called inheritance.ilm.summit.org. And it's a website that is fairly common. Many people have used this. It's called Islamic Inheritance Calculator. And it has a FAQ section in which you can actually go through some commonly asked questions, like which books do you refer to in terms of making these calculations? How does the calculator compare with online calculators? What are the limitations? How can I reach you if you have questions? So it has some information. Then it has a contact us. It has some rules in terms of how these situations are determined, because Islamic inheritance is actually complicated. It's not 100% straightforward. There are verses in the Quran that reference Islamic inheritance, but you actually have to go back to the ahadith and the sunnah to get the full context, because there are so many different scenarios that when you put it all together, you can form this calculator. But without that, it's very difficult to determine that situation. So I'm going to walk through a test case scenario with a member of the audience right now. So I'm going to pick from a wide array of people that we have here. Does anyone want to volunteer? I see a lot of hands that go up. If I had to pick one, there's a gentleman in the blue shirt. Assalamu alaikum, brother. Let us delve into the future, and if you were to pass, who would be left out of your family?
I got a wife.
You have one wife.
A son and a daughter.
You have one son, and you have one daughter. But let me ask you even further. Do you have a?
Yeah, my mom and dad's alive.
Okay. Your mother is alive, so you have a heir. That would be your mother. You have a father.
Yes.
Now, do you have any brothers?
Yeah, one.
You have one brother. Any sisters? Three sisters. Paternal grandmother, maternal grandmother, no grandmother. Okay.
I shouldn't say no.
Well, yeah, not no, but no surviving. Grandsons, full nephews. Okay. All right, we'll just speed through this, and then you simply go to the bottom and say calculate inheritance. So, in Ashraf's situation, yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but here we're going to walk through this. So your wife would be designated 1/8 or 12.5% of your wealth. Your son would be designated 13/24 or 54.17% of your wealth. So I wish I was your son.
Did you get my daughter in there? She would get something.
Oh, we don't have your daughter in there. I'm sorry.
Let's check it because that was kind of high for my son.
Yeah, that's why we didn't have your daughter. And this is again a good reason as to why you want to practice on this site. So let's now recalculate. So your wife would be 1/8, 12.5%. Your son would be 36.11%. And that brings me to a common question in Islam that there's no equality between men and women, but that is actually false. The situation is that, yes, a son would inherit double what the woman would inherit,
It's his sister.
but there are some contexts as to why that happens. And first and foremost is that in Islam, the son would be responsible for other individuals at some point in his life. Whereas the daughter, she could acquire wealth from whatever means that is halal, but she's not responsible for anyone. Like for instance, my wife financially is not responsible for me, nor would she ever be. So if her father passes, his son would be inheriting more. And there's some logic there. I'm not going to delve deep into that, but there's a reason as to why a male would inherit double, because they have more obligations in Islam. So going back to this example, 36.11% would go to his son. His daughter would receive 18.06%. His father would receive 2/12 or 16.67%. The mother the same. The full brother 0%. The full sister 0%. So one thing to note here, again, unless you're in very rare situations, your brother or your sister will not inherit. In fact, I'm not sure how that would happen. We can go to the rules chart, and I just want to kind of share that. So on number 10 for the rules, a full sister, could get half if the deceased has only one full sister. If the deceased does not have any offspring, if the deceased does not have a male paternal ancestor, if the deceased does not have any full brothers. The full sister could get 2/3 if the deceased has multiple full sisters. Deceased does not have any offspring. Again, deceased does not have any male paternal ancestor. Deceased does not have any full brothers. So there are scenarios in which a maternal grandmother could get money. There's scenarios in which a maternal sibling, but then there's blocking rules. So if you really want to have fun, you can make a computer program that figures all this out. But a son blocks.
And they already did.
Exactly. So a son blocks a paternal grandson, a paternal granddaughter, full brother, full sister, paternal brother. A grandson blocks a full brother. This one gets into a father blocks a paternal grandfather. Mother blocks a paternal grandmother. So this goes all the way from A, goes all the way to, looks like T, a full cousin's son blocks a paternal cousin's son's son. So I really want to take a moment here to acknowledge the work these guys have done on this website. This is a great detail, and there is a way in which your full cousin's son could inherit from you, but
full cousin's son's son.
Full cousin's son's son would block a paternal cousin's son's son. So they've gone through this, and they have put in excruciating detail, and I want to recognize the fact that this is a great site, and obviously everybody needs to use it at some point. But I'm going to go through another test case because this is something that I want to go through a common example that is very prevalent amongst some of the people who are older in our community. So I'm going to go through a scenario where one person, one wife. If you have more than one wife, I'm actually going to go through that one as well. But if you have one son, and let's say you have 3 daughters, and let's say your father is deceased and your mother is deceased. Okay? And you still have, let's say you have 3 brothers and you have 2 sisters. So this is common amongst older people in the community who don't have surviving parents. So I want to kind of share with you the breakdown here. So here, in that scenario, the wife would get 1/8, the son would get 35%, the daughter would get, the daughters would break down 52.5%, full brother gets 0, full sister gets 0. And actually, each daughter would get 17.5%. So on the right, on the left it shares by category, on the right it shares by individual. So I think that's really neat as well. One thing I want to kind of notate, what do you find interesting about this breakdown? Going back even to my story with that brother who mentioned this. The brother had mentioned he wanted his wife to get everything. And if you notice in both the examples, the wife gets the least percentage.